Hi everyone, welcome back to Brookdale Farm. So today I thought we might have a look at this little English Fordson from the 1930s. Now this is part of Dennis Tattersall's collection and was kindly donated to us by the Tattersall family, and we're going to have a go and see if we can get it running. When we got it, it was missing the front wheel and the rear tyre on the other side. I have got a radiator to go on it, but I haven't had a chance to put that on yet. The other unusual thing on this tractor is that somebody's put what looks like a Holden carburetor on there. I'm not quite sure what it is, something like that anyway. Definitely not the original one to go on here. I've got another manifold, and at some point we'll see if we can get the right carburetor on there. But first I just thought we would have a look and see if we can get it going. Take you for a little bit of a walk around it first. It's reasonably complete other than the radiator. Somebody's put a rather unusual extension on the drawbar down here. Needs a new steering wheel and a few things like that, and the mudguards have got a bit of rust in them, all the usual sort of things, but it's a really nice little tractor. I like these English Fordsons. Anyway, it does turn. It doesn't have any compression. One of the big issues with these are a 4-cylinder petrol kerosene side valve engine. So we've got the 2 inlet ports here, and this is the exhaust manifold down here. They originally had a kerosene vaporizer that bolts on the side here, but one of the big problems with these is that the valves on them stick. Most of these that I've had anything to do with have had sticking valves. So we're going to take the manifold off. There's only a few bolts to get that off, and then there's a plate under here that covers up the valves. We're going to take that off as well. That gives us access to hopefully spray some stuff in through the ports, a bit of lubricant in through the ports, and then work the valves up and down under this plate here. Now the other issue that this one has is that when you check the oil, this is the wrong dipstick, and I'm well aware of that. It's got way too much oil in it. Now with these Fordsons, that usually means the rain's got in somewhere and it's half full of water now. So what I tend to do whenever before I start one of these that's been sitting outside is just crack the drain plug under here and let any water dribble out. The water sits on the bottom and is thinner than the oil, so it will run out first and you'll just be left with oil in there. Now when I did that on this particular one, nothing came out at all. Now these Fordsons have a screen mesh filter in here, so there's a plate on the bottom here that you're supposed to unbolt, take the filter out and clean it out. There's no oil coming out when I undo the drain bung. That means that filter in there is absolutely chocked up. So we're going to drop that out, take the filter out, but we're probably also going to drop the sump off and clean the sump out, because it's going to be absolutely full of muck, I would guess. We'll have a look anyway once we get that off. Now these operate on a splash feed oiling system. There's no oil pump in them. The flywheel picks up oil and throws it around the engine. There's some funnels and pipes on the other side which funnel it down to some trays that sit in the sump here, and the big ends dip themselves in that, that's how the big ends get oiled. The big ends also splash oil up onto the camshaft. So it's a very, very basic oiling system, but if the sump is that gummed up, these trays up here are all going to be gummed up as well and full of rubbish. So yeah, we're probably going to take the sump off and give all of that a really good clean out. Okay, so we've got the manifold off now and the plate off from under here. And we were a bit lucky with this. If we have a look in this port here, we can see that it's been about half full of water. So that's this is an intake port, so that was coming in through the top of the carburetor. Luckily somebody covered it up before it got water in anything else. We can also see that there's a little bit of rust staining where it's been running down the valve stem here. So we have at least 5 sticking valves. This one's one of the more obvious ones. So I'm gonna clean these out now and spray a bit of lubricant in the bottom of the valve stems and in here. And then I'm gonna get a screwdriver in here and just try and work them up and down a little bit. It's quite hard to get in through the spark plug holes down onto the head of the valves on these. So if I can't free them up from the bottom here, I may have to take the cylinder head off and free them up. If I have to do that, we'll take them out and lap them in as well. But hopefully I can just free these up, and that should give us enough compression for this to start. Okay, so we've got all the valves freed up, and they actually freed up a lot more easily than I thought they would, including this rusty one right up the end here. I thought that would be well stuck. We still don't have a lot of compression. It's blowing back out all of the valves, so they've got dirt stuck underneath them. And obviously, ideally, the thing to do is to take the head off, cut the valve seats, maybe check the valves, lap them in, put new valves in them. But we still would like to get this running and just see how the rest of it runs before we go to all of that effort. One thing that really helps is if you can just lift the valve and let it spring closed onto the seat a few times. This helps to get any dirt and rust out that's sitting caked up on the seat, and just helps the valve close a bit better. I have seen an engine that had almost no compression come back to pretty much full compression just by doing this. So I'm going to fiddle around with these and just work them all open and closed a little bit, and hopefully we'll get a little bit of compression on this engine. The next thing we're going to do is drain the oil. So if we look under here, there's a drain bung here. It's a little bit hard to, oh, that's better. Drain bung here that we're going to undo, and then we're going to remove this whole plate here to get the filter out that's in the bottom here. While the sump's draining, the next thing we need to get off to remove the sump is this bar under here, which goes to the front axles down here and under the sump here. Under the sump is just a split pin and then a pin that you pull out to get that off. But these bolts down the front here are often very difficult to get undone. And this one, the head has actually broken off it. It's got the nut on the back here, but the head is broken off, so I'm guessing this is going to be well seized into the axle here. Now that we've got this stabilizing bar off the front, there's a whole row of bolts all the way down here, and then all the way around here as well. So there's a joint here. We don't need to undo these bolts up here, but they do go all the way underneath. So I'm going to start undoing them so that we can drop that sump off. Okay, this is the brass screen or oil filter that sits in the bottom of the sump here, and it's been sitting in the funnel now draining for probably an hour. When I dropped this out initially, this was completely full of thick oily black sludge that just wasn't going to circulate at all. So it's really important when you're first trying to get something going that's been sitting for a while to know where the filters are and check and make sure that it is going to get oil circulating through it. If we had just gone ahead and started this up, there's no oil at all that would have been circulating through this, and it would have been like running the engine with no oil in it at all. So it's really important to make sure all of this stuff is clean before you start an engine. Okay, so we've got this sump off, and it's not quite as bad as I thought it was going to be. It is pretty revolting, but I was expecting it to be a bit worse. So we do have a reasonable amount of sludge in here. These are the little trays, 4 little trays that I was talking about, where the big ends pick up oil. They've got a little dipper that dips in there and throws the oil around. And you can see here the sludge is so deep that the dipper has been picking up the sludge instead of any nice clean oil, which is ideally what we want. So I'm going to give this a really good clean out now and get it back on so that we can get some oil into it again. Okay, so this is the plate that goes on the bottom of the sump, and the conical filter screen thing sits on here. As I was cleaning this out, I noticed that in the bottom here, it's really quite gritty. I'm not sure what it is, but it's almost like coarse river sand. It might just be really hard bits of carbon and sludge in the oil, because it does seem to break down a bit when I rub it, but hopefully, well, I'm very glad that I took all of this off to clean it out properly and didn't try and start the tractor with it like this, because this really would have done some damage to the engine on it. Okay, so we're ready to start putting back together our sump now. I'm going to start by putting the filter in and this bottom plate on, because it's easy to get out while it's upside down like this. Now we've got a new gasket to go on here. Because we need to take this cover off every time we do an oil change, I'm not going to use any gasket material, gasket glue on here. Instead, I'm just going to use a little bit of grease. So we're just going to smear grease around the gasket surfaces. This is what they use, well, one of the products that they used all the time before we had Celastic and all the other fantastic gasket compounds we have now. This not only helps to seal it, works really well on water joints as well, but it also helps to get it apart next time we need to take it apart. And you put a good dollop of grease on, it also helps to hold everything together while you're assembling it. Okay, so we've got our sump back underneath here. Now this gasket round here, on this face here, is actually a full circle gasket and goes all the way up through here. So the intended way to put these sumps on is actually to put the sump on, then put the engine in and do up this bolt here with the gasket on it. Because we're not taking the engine out, the gasket I have made to go here is just a semicircle. Now these sumps are a little bit of a nuisance to get in. You sort of got to tip them up and then bring them up straight, and they're heavy. They weigh about 25 kilos, and you've got to shuffle this gasket in and make sure the 2 gaskets for the top are in the right spot. So what I like to do is put a ratchet strap around them. This allows you to winch them up and sort of wriggle them round a bit. Once you get them up, you can put a jack under this point here to hold them up, but the ratchet strap just gives you a little bit more flexibility to try and get everything in. So I'm going to try and lift the sump up and get it into place now, and we'll see if we can then get it all bolted up. The other thing is that because this gasket is not making the full circle here, so we've got a joint in this one, we've also got a joint in this one. I am just going to put a bit of aviation gasket Celastic in this corner here on each side, just to help it seal. The rest of it, I'm not going to worry about too much. These surfaces are pretty good, and just a gasket in there should make it seal well enough. There's an awful lot of bolts holding the sump on, and it's a pretty rigid sump, so we'll see how we go. Okay, so we've managed to winch our sump up on our ratchet strap. We've got a couple of blocks of wood just holding it underneath here because it's not quite balanced, so it's tilting back a bit. We've managed to slide our two gaskets in either side, right round to the front seal. So next we're going to put a couple of bolts in, lift the back up a bit more, and try and slide the gasket in the back here. That's always the more challenging one. Okay, so we've got all the gaskets in. We've got a few bolts holding everything in place. So now it's just a matter of putting the rest of the million bolts in that holds this sump on. Now I always like to put these bolts in round here and do these up first. This pulls the sump and the gearbox together and does this up tight. If you do these ones up along here first, you can have a bit of a gap here, and it puts a lot of pressure on things when you try and do these ones up and you're trying to pull this together. So I'm going to put all of these bolts in next, and we'll do everything up and we'll get the sump bolted back on. Okay, so we've got the sump back on. The next thing to do is to fill it up with oil. Now on these tractors, the oil filler is right up the front here, and it's got a fairly coarse filter in there for when you're filling it. This is also the engine breather, this funny looking cap here. And to check the oil level, the dipstick is right back here. Now this is the wrong dipstick for it, it's way too long. So I'm going to have to get a different dipstick, but we know that these engines take about 2.5 English gallons of oil, so I'm going to put that in, and that should be enough to at least get it running. And the cattle have wandered over to see what we're doing this afternoon too. Okay, so we've got our carburetor back on here. This is not the original carburetor, but I thought I'd give it a go and see if it was going to work. I'm not particularly convinced that it's going to work, but we'll see. So we've got a boat petrol tank plumbed into the carburetor. I've blanked off the bottom radiator outlet, and I'm just going to fill up put a bit of water in here just to keep it cool. We're not going to run it for very long anyway at the moment. We're just going to see if it will start. Okay, so I spent a fair while fiddling with this yesterday, and I could get it to fire but not run. I don't think this carburetor is letting enough fuel through. I don't think it's ever been run with this on. I think somebody put it on to try and get it running, but looking at it, I don't think they were successful. And then the magneto gave up on me yesterday too, and I wasn't getting a consistent good spark. There's only 4 bolts that hold the manifold and carburetor and the magneto on each of them. So I've got another tractor that I know was running, and I'm just going to swap the magneto and carburetor and manifold from that tractor, and we'll see if it will run then.